tour guide today. As I mentioned, this is an abridged version of the tour, only because it is our off-season right now. Normally I would actually be dressed as a soldier from the War of 1812. All of our tours are conducted by guys in period dress. And a musket demonstration or a rifle demonstration is always included as well. And all that takes place right out back here. We see these folks walking up the path. We typically do our introductions right here. And the introduction consists of discussing all of the aspects of the War of 1812. That we discuss the causes of the war, which was free trade and sailors' rights. In the early 1800s, Europe is embroiled in war. Napoleon Bonaparte has declared himself the Emperor of France, and he is running around Europe taking over countries over there. The British are at war with him, trying to stop him from doing that. The Americans did not want to take sides in this fight. That was their problem. Let them figure it out. However, there's always money to be made off of the war, and we were more than happy to sell supplies to both the French and to the British. And the United States actually has the world's largest merchant marine fleet in the early 1800s, and we are sending supplies to both nations. And of course, neither side cared for that very much, the fact that we were supplying their enemies. And so they both issued out laws and decrees stating that it was illegal for neutral nations to trade with their enemies. The British had the ability to enforce these laws, whereas the French did not. The British had the Royal Navy, the biggest, most powerful navy in the world at the time, and they would stop the American ships out in the Atlantic. They would seize the cargo. They would press the sailors into the Royal Navy. In the years leading up to the War of 1812, there are thousands of sailors taken off of American ships. As it turns out, a good number of them are actual deserters from the Royal Navy, but there's enough American-born citizens that are taken that kind of get America's name up. At this point, usually when we have a big group of kids, to kind of illustrate that point, we put out an imaginary line between we split the group into two, so to speak, and kind of say, okay, you guys are at war. Now we are supplying you. Can we ask the other side, are you guys going to be happy with us that we're doing this? Try to get put it into their mindset. Our typical, kind of our bread and butter of our tours is 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So that's really who most of our tours are kind of aimed at that grade level. At this point too, then we start grabbing kids out of the crowd. We'll walk up and ask them what their name is. If it has a British sounding name, we'll just grab them. And that's our impressment. And we're dragging them out of the tour, and we make them panic a little bit. We tell them they're not going to join the rest of the class on the tour. So that kind of puts them into that mindset that, look, this is what was going on 200 years ago. So we try to put it in real terms for them that they can understand. And so that's how we kind of deal with all that. And all that takes place right out here, just out between the visitor center here and the fort. We also then talk about the uniforms, what we're wearing, we'll kill the weapons, the hats, and everything like that. And that's really the introduction. That all takes place right here. Okay. We have entered Fort Meigs now, and the first thing you probably notice as we came walking in are these earth mounds. These are called traverses, and they're built here to defend this place against incoming cannonballs. During the first siege of Fort Meigs, the first week of May, 1813, the British set up cannon positions across the river. They bombarded this fort for about a week. Anywhere from 250 to over 500 cannonballs per day came into this fort. The best way to fire a cannonball is to fire on a flat trajectory. If you've seen the cartoons, they fire the cannonballs in the air. If they did that in real life, the cannonball would come down. It might take out one person. Not very effective. The best way to get the most amount of damage from every shot fired on a flat trajectory, the cannonball will actually bounce and skip and roll across the ground as if you're skipping a stone on the lake, and it'll do a lot more damage that way. We call it bowling for humans. And the best way to defend yourself against that, build up these earth mounds where the cannonballs will hit the side of the earth rather than do more damage. These earth mounds are the only original parts of Fort Meigs that are left. Turn around, take a look at that wall. You'll notice that every fifth or sixth picket is cut down. That way the men with muskets and rifles can fire through the wall. They stand behind the taller pickets in order to reload. The tops of the walls are all sharpened. It's kind of like 1812 barbed wire. Anybody try and get up and over that or hurt themselves pretty good.
Is this still like built exactly how they would have built it the first time?
It is built.
With like oak and
It is oak timbers. Yeah, 2 feet thick. As you look there, the doorway, that is the thickness of the walls. Yeah, it is built in the same style. Of course, the interior is modern with electric and lighting and museum exhibits to take a look at. Blockhouse number 6 discusses the 2 battles that took place here, and we have a timeline of interpretive panels that really goes the day-to-day throughout the first and the second siege. Fort Meigs was attacked twice by the British and their Indian allies in the spring and summer of 1813. The first siege took place the beginning of May. The British actually arrived in the area at the end of April, about the same time that the construction of the fort started to wind up. The British landed in about 2 miles downriver at an old abandoned British fort called Fort Meigs, and they offloaded their supplies there. They set their camp up there. They hauled the cannons about 2 miles down overland, simply because the rapids of the river started. The river got too shallow. The ships that they came in from Lake Erie could not get any farther because they're just too big. The river was too shallow. And so they started to dig in directly across from the fort. It took them several days to get their batteries built. It's at that same time the men inside Fort Meigs were building the traverses. On May 1st, those British cannons opened fire. As I said before, anywhere from 250 to over 500 cannonballs per day came into this fort. In the first 2 days, about 750 shot came in. And I think the traverses did their jobs pretty well because the Americans suffered 4 killed and 7 wounded in that same time. The bombing did get so bad here that men gave up living in their tents in the fields, and they actually dug little caves in the backsides of the traverses. They called them bomb-proofs, and they spent much of their time living underground. So much so that one British officer described the Americans here as an army of groundhogs. So every time a cannonball came flying in, they'd scurry down into their hole and get out of harm's way. The Americans hunkered down. They took that bombardment for a week. When the British first showed up in the area, General Harrison had sent messengers out to ask for any help that was available to get here now, and help was coming in the form of 1,200 Kentucky militia. They're coming by boat down the Maumee River from the Defiance area under the command of General Green Clay. And they arrived here the evening of May 4th. They managed to get a runner in to get orders from General Harrison through the siege line, because Fort Meigs was surrounded during the first siege. The main British batteries were to the north on the other side of the river. There was a secondary battery off to the east. To the south and to the west were Native Americans off the woods. And so it was loosely surrounded. But they were able to get a messenger through, and they got orders to General Clay. They wanted him to split his forces up. 800 of the men were to land on the north side of the river. 400 were to land on this side of the river. The men across the way were under the command of Colonel William Dudley. It was their job to sweep in behind the British cannons, capture them, destroy them, and then come immediately back to the fort. They got kind of a late start. All the fighting there on the other side was supposed to start at dawn. They didn't actually leave the boats until about 9 in the morning, though. And they swept in through the forest as planned. Somehow, some way, the 800 Kentuckians crashing through the woods actually took the British by surprise. There was not too many British manning the cannons at that point. Most of the troops were in their camp about 2 miles away. There were a handful of men manning the cannons, though. They were kind of taken by surprise or overwhelmed by the 800 men advancing on them, and so they took off running for their camp. The Kentuckians swarmed over the guns. Unfortunately, things had gone wrong from the beginning. The man with the tools to destroy the guns ended up landing on the south side of the river, not on the north side where he was needed. And so that kind of went wrong. So the men did the best they could with the tools they had to destroy the guns. And after they did this, they celebrated the fact that they had just done all this. They patted themselves on the back. They gave 3 cheers to General Harrison. In the meantime, they say General Harrison was inside Fort Meigs, standing on the Grand Traverse, shouting, "Dudley, come back! Dudley, come back!" But Dudley couldn't hear him. He was too far away. He wanted them to get back because off in the woods behind them, they noticed some Indians. And the Kentuckians started to get tangled up with the Indians. And it's been said that Kentuckians and Indians are kind of like cats and dogs. One of them has to chase the other. And so, true to form, those Kentuckians started to turn, started to chase those Indians into the woods. The Indians weren't done. They fell back deeper and deeper into the forest, drawing those Kentuckians away from the cannons. That gave the British enough time. Those first few soldiers that got chased off by the Kentuckians coming through, well, they've now gotten back to their camp, gotten all their buddies together, and hey, we're being attacked. They march back down. And so as the Kentuckians are off in the woods chasing Indians, the British are recapturing their cannons. The Kentuckians started to get surrounded, started to get overwhelmed by the Indians, and so they started to retreat out of the forest. But instead of leaving in one large group, one man said they were strung out for over a quarter mile running through the woods. And they left in small groups, 2s and 3s, and as each man left the forest, there's the British Army standing there waiting for him. Of the 800 men that landed on the north side of the river that day, 650 were captured. About 50 were killed in the fighting. The rest were able to escape, make it back into the fort. Those prisoners were rounded up, marched down that 2 miles to Fort Miami. Along the way, the Indians forced them to run the gauntlet. They formed 2 lines. They forced the prisoners up the middle. And as each man went running by, they take a swing at them with their tomahawk. They're ripping the clothes off the men's backs, shooting them as they went running by. They're taking their scalps. Those that survived running the gauntlet were then massed in the center of Old Fort Miami. Some of the natives got up on the earth wall surrounding and started shooting down at the massive men and shooting fishing battle. All became known as Dudley's Massacre. It took place the morning of May 5th, 1813. While all that's going on the north side of the river, on the south side, off to the west, General Clay and his men fight their way into the fort, clear away the Indian resistance off to the west. Also at the same time, to the east, another man, Colonel John Miller, takes another 400 Americans out of Fort Meigs to go destroy that secondary British battery that was built off to the east. Because the traverses were so effective, the British realized they were not damaging the fort as much as they wanted. So on the second day of the siege, they actually crossed the river with 2 more cannons, set them off to the east. Usually, I will ask groups if when you came driving in the morning, did you pass the cemetery down the corner? If they say yes, well, that cemetery was the location of that secondary battery. And if you know where to look, in the back of that cemetery, you can still see the 2 earthworks that were dug out where those cannons were placed. Still visible today. So all this fighting was going on between about 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. the morning of May 5th. The next few days were spent exchanging prisoners, collecting the dead off the field. There really wasn't any fighting. On May 9th, General Proctor, the commander of the British Army, realized that his artillery bombardment had failed to destroy the fort. He did not have enough soldiers to try to capture Fort Meigs. It was too well defended, and so they got back on their boats and the British sailed back up for Detroit. For the first time since the beginning of the war, the Americans had a significant victory over the British Army here at Fort Meigs. The British would attempt a second siege of Fort Meigs at the end of July. A couple of months later, they would return. Not as exciting as the first siege. The big thing that happened during the second siege is the sham battle. It took place south of the fort, off in the woods. The Indians were firing their guns in the air, making a lot of noise, trying to draw the Americans out into an ambush. General Clay was in charge of the fort at the time. He had just received word from General Harrison several days before that he didn't have any more soldiers to give him, so you have to make do with what you have here. And so it was impossible. That was a relief column under attack, which was the plan. The British and Indians' plan was to have the Americans think that their buddies were under attack, go out, get ambushed, but since the Americans knew that nobody was coming to their aid, they knew it was a ruse. They referred to it as the sham battle. They say that a huge thunderstorm came up, and that put an end to the sham battle. They hung out in the area for a few more days, but that's pretty much it for the second siege. Soon thereafter, about a week later, the same group of British and Indians showed up at a fort called Fort Stephenson, about 40 miles away, where Fremont, Ohio is today. There they got a pretty bloody nose trying to attack that place, so again they retreat up to Detroit. About a month later, the Battle of Lake Erie takes place. Oliver Hazard Perry has his huge victory out on Lake Erie, which ushers in
General Harrison's plan to invade Canada. When Oliver Hazard Perry, Commodore Perry, sends his famous message here to General Harrison, "We have met the enemy and they are ours," that is Harrison's cue that the lake is now secure in American hands, which is what he needs in order to get his supplies to his soldiers up in Canada to start that invasion. And so that's when he marches north. He actually reduced Fort Meigs in size. The large fort that we have reconstructed actually only lasted about 8 months. They dismantled the large fort, tore it down. They built the second smaller Fort Meigs in the northwest corner. He left about 200 men here. The remaining 3,000 or so men headed north. They got onto Perry's ships. He ferried them across the lake. They sent some men off to go recapture Detroit, which was fairly easy because the British just gave it up. They started retreating eastward through Canada. The Americans chased them down, caught up with them near what is Moravian Town, Ontario today. The Battle of the Thames takes place on the 5th of October. Only lasts about 15 or 20 minutes, but effectively ends all the fighting out here in the west. At that battle, Tecumseh is killed, who was the native warrior who was leading the native confederacy allied to the British. With his death, that confederacy just disintegrated. He was the glue that was keeping that together. General Proctor, the British commander, left his troops on the field to get killed or captured by the Americans. It was a very quick, decisive battle. Ended all the fighting that had been going on out here in the west for the previous year and a half. Fort Meigs then did stand until the end of the war. The War of 1812 did continue in other theaters. In upstate New York, there was heavy fighting up along the St. Lawrence River. The eastern seaboard of the United States would be attacked in 1814. Washington, D.C. would be burned to the ground. All the government buildings would be put to the torch by the British. And in 1815, a little-known general named Andrew Jackson would successfully defend the city of New Orleans from British attack. But the fighting in the war in the west out here, where Fort Meigs was a key point, was pretty much over by the end of 1813. Any questions about the fighting? Anything about that? In Blockhouse 6 is a map of Maumee River Valley, which shows the location of all the actions that I was just talking about, so I do kind of point that out. We have artist illustrations of the Kentuckians attacking the British cannons, so we kind of use that as visual aids to help the kids kind of grasp what was going on. We also have portraits of the major players. We have General Harrison, Proctor, Tecumseh, and General Clay. Portraits of them, very large, long walls. What else? We also have a cannon inside there. I'll typically talk about cannons and how they were being used. Different types of ammunition that would come. Typical cannonball is a solid chunk of iron. It was cast iron, and that is your cannonball. That's the classic thing that you think of. It was designed to punch holes through buildings, break through walls, things like that. That's what would bounce and skip and roll across the ground. The cannons could also fire a canister shot, which was basically a tin can full of musket balls. When that was fired, that tin can would break apart, the musket balls would fly out in front of the cannon. And the infantry lines, they'd be standing in long lines, shoulder to shoulder, using their muskets. Because of the technology they had, that was how it had to be done. You had to stand in long lines like that. Well, effective way to break up that group with using artillery piece is to fire this canister shot and basically turn the cannon into a huge shotgun. It would just blast giant holes in the infantry lines. They also have grape shot in there. Grape shot kind of does the same thing. There's 9 iron balls attached to a central rod with a netting around it. Kind of looks like a bunch of grapes hanging off the mine. That's how it got its name. It would do the same thing. We also have a bomb in there, a howitzer shell. It's a hollowed-out cannonball filled with gunpowder. There was a wooden plug with a fuse that would be sticking out. So it looks like a cartoon bomb that you would see Wile E. Coyote carrying around. When that was fired, the flames coming out the end of the cannon would ignite that fuse. If you had everything timed right, it would be burning down as it went flying through the air. If you had the fuse timed right, it would explode over the heads of the enemy, some big piece of the metal raining down the top of it. When you sing the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, which was written during the War of 1812, you sing about the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air. That's what you're singing about. There's a man over in England who took that weapon one step further, because keep in mind too, England is at war on 2 fronts now. She's fighting Napoleon in Europe. The British are fighting the Americans here in North America. They're bankrupt. They have been at war for decades. They are running out of manpower, and you see this throughout history. People try to invent new weapons, more destructive weapons, because they want to end the war faster, bring peace about. And so the one of the great weapons of the War of 1812, of the Napoleonic era, is a young lieutenant in the British artillery took that howitzer shell, mixed in scrap iron, broken glass, whatever you get your hands on, in with a gunpowder charge, so that when it exploded, even more debris came flying. The guy that decided to do that was Lieutenant Henry Shrapnel. That's where they get the term shrapnel from today. All the debris that gets blown out of an explosion. That was invented at this time period. Punishment is either create pain or make you look like an idiot in front of your friends. So in addition to making you sit up there, they'd also shave off half a head of hair. That was for two purposes. One, it showed who the troublemakers were. Everybody's wearing a uniform, look alike. Officers can't keep track of the individual soldiers, so how can they tell who the guys that follow the rules are from those that get into mischief? If you're missing half a head of hair, they know you're a troublemaker. Also, you look like a fool, everybody's been making fun of you. That was part of the punishment, it's public humiliation. And this is even one of the worst punishments. This is the time when a man's honor was everything, right? So in the early 1800s, this is when men are fighting duels with each other. So if I insulted you, you could challenge me to a duel, march off our 10 paces, turn and try and kill each other over a single insult. So for this guy to stand at the top of a hill and be insulted by everybody in the army for 2 hours straight and then not be able to do anything about it afterwards was a pretty big punishment for the time. Musicians were so important in the army, they actually got paid more than the guys carrying the muskets did. A private made $8 a month, a musician would make $9 a month. William Henry Harrison, he was making over $200 a month. So there's a big discrepancy between what the enlisted men got and what the officers got. Not only with their pay, but also with their living quarters, which leads me to, this is where our tents are set up. You do a common tent in there. You would put 6 men to a tent. The common tent is about 6 feet tall, 6 feet wide, 6 feet wide. 6 guys in it. Modern day, people have a little bubble of personal space, about a foot out from around you. People get up very close, even just a conversation, face to face like this. So the whole idea of your personal space was different back then, especially in the army. From here too, you get a good view of where the British artillery was across the river that bombarded the fort. And if you look across the way there, you can see the cars going up the hillside. When they get to the crest of the hill, that's where the British artillery was set up. Just to the left of the road, you see a brick church steeple. Where that church sits, approximately to the right. To give you an idea of range, if we were to fire a cannon from this spot today, we could probably hit the water tower across the road. We're well within range, firing back and forth across the map.